And now Ophelia Ravencroft. Ophelia, non-binary lesbian woman and activist in local fights for sex worker, queer, trans rights. Her PhD research, fascinating ethnomusicology at Memorial University, studies gender equality in the St. John's heavy metal community. Ophelia, welcome to the virtual screen.
Dr. McGregor, I think your enthusiasm for my research is possibly even greater than my own. So I appreciate that. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Ophelia Ravencroft. My pronouns are the sound of radio dial tuning, trying to find a station. And I don't have any slides, so you'll have to put up with my Ferris Bueller kind of run, and I'll do my best to be entertaining. In trying to work out a topic for today, my initial plan was to touch on trans issues as they related to this pandemic, and to talk about the ways that lockdown, for instance, has served as a catalyst for a lot of folks to have engage in some gender exploration and discover things about themselves. But I would feel remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to discuss the way that COVID has impacted sex workers in Canada. This is an issue across the globe, of course, but I can speak to it predominantly from a national perspective as well as from a local one. I've been involved in the fight for sex worker rights for a number of years, both publicly and privately, and it's something I'm happy to touch on now. For those who are not overly familiar with the system that we have in Canada, we've implemented a variation on the Nordic model of sex work legislation in Canada, which holds that the selling of services is not illegal, but the buying of it is. And within the framework that we've established, it's really quite difficult. It's a very small needle that you have to thread to engage in this work without, in one way or another, breaking one law or another, around advertising, around solicitation in certain ways, around where you're working, when you're working, how, and so on, which has left a lot of workers in Canada feeling, of course, quite vulnerable, which is regrettably the inevitable condition of sex work in the way that we currently treat it. COVID has amplified that as it has amplified most inequalities in our society. The reality of the situation is that because of this legal framework, many sex workers are scared to come forward, scared to declare their income on their taxes, which, the CRA are administrators of the Income Tax Act. They are not a criminal enforcement agency. At the end of the day, they are looking to make sure that you pay your fair share of taxes under the law. So there are some workers who will feel comfortable doing that, but because of the legal ramifications, which potentially could result, many do not, or at least the fear of those legal ramifications. When the Canadian government introduced the CERB back last April, the income testing requirement on CERB, the minimum of $5,000, meant that anybody who hadn't made that much, of course, wasn't eligible. But if you were a sex worker who was nervous to declare your income on your taxes, you automatically didn't qualify if you hadn't listed that there, meaning you were stuck between a rock and a hard place. The industry has slowed down in much of the country. Here in Newfoundland, in speaking to workers, both in massage parlors and strip clubs and so on locally, we are aware that the damage to our local industry has been a little bit more minimal, perhaps, than it has elsewhere because of the stability of the COVID situation in Newfoundland. But elsewhere in Canada, we're aware that some businesses have closed. Workers have found that clients are simply unwilling to come out, owing to the danger, the risk that they're taking in buying services right now, which has made it, it's made it extremely economically vulnerable for workers who are already facing more than enough vulnerability, stigma, judgment, and attack as it is. What this has led to is an increased pressure on the client side for workers to knock their rates down, to provide discounts, we're now hearing reports from across the country, from Ontario in particular, as well as other places, that for outdoor workers who are already by far the most vulnerable sex workers, that a service that previously might have cost $100 or $200, a client will now say, well, it's going to be $50, take it or leave it. I know you don't have another source of income. Because sex workers have been marginalized in the ways that they have for so long, it's made many unable to access the benefits which are presently available. It's forced them to continue to work in unsafe and increasingly illegal conditions. There are requirements between the provinces around things like PPE, masks, and so on, which have just taken that needle that sex workers need to thread and made it even smaller. All of those things put together have made this an exceptionally vulnerable time for sex workers. The reality of this is, and we know this from experience, any time that you place further restrictions on sex workers and any time that you take that eye of the needle and make it even smaller, it puts more power in the hands of clients. It drives workers underground. It makes them even more vulnerable. This is not anybody's intention, obviously, in dealing with issues of COVID, but we are aware that it has worsened those inequalities quite considerably. In the going forward, I think this is a particularly essential time for us to be talking about decriminalization, but we'll come around to that when we talk policy a little bit later. But be aware that as harsh as COVID has been on everyone, the impact on sex workers, their finances, on their safety, their stability, and their ability to conduct themselves in their profession in a free and safe way, the impact has been quite severe.
Ophelia, we need a full panel for each one of you. Thank you very much for bringing our attention to your activism. And our final